Hi everyone, this is Ravi. Welcome to Katalon automation tutorial. As you all know, I've already published 38 YouTube videos covering beginners to the advanced level concepts. This is our lesson 39. Please do subscribe to the channel, click on bell icon. You'll receive notifications whenever I publish more videos. As part of this particular lesson, I'm going to teach you how can we create and modify the test objects during runtime by using Katalon Studio. As part of this particular lesson, I'm going to cover 3 different chapters. The first chapter is Introduction, Requirements and Benefits of Creating Test Objects During Runtime. This covers 3 different sections. First section, introduction, and the second one, requirements for creating, modifying test objects in runtime, and then benefits of creating and modifying the test objects during runtime. And then chapter 2, create test objects during runtime. So in this chapter, we are going to start creating test objects during runtime directly in test case by using Katalon Studio. And then we are going to create a keyword for dynamic runtime objects. In chapter 3, how can we modify test objects during runtime? That is what I'm going to cover. As part of this chapter, first I'm going to teach you how to modify test object by changing the element property during runtime. And then how can we modify test object by adding a new element property during runtime. So now let us start our session with these agenda items. This is our chapter 1, Introduction to Creating Test Objects During Runtime, Requirements and Benefits of Creating Test Objects During Runtime. As part of section 1, in chapter 1, you learn Introduction of Creating Test Objects During Runtime. Test objects are one of the most crucial parts of building a successful automation project. Some of the test objects are static in nature, which means they do not change at all. And some of the objects are dynamic in nature, which means they are dependent on some dynamically changing parameters. So this tutorial shows you different approaches for handling different types of test objects, and especially we will concentrate on strategy of defining test objects during runtime. So following are the different approaches to handle dynamic objects, which were already covered in other courses of Katalon Academy. I would recommend you guys to refer those courses for these concepts. So following are the different approaches to handle dynamic objects. Some of them are using relative XPath with starting text and using relative XPath with following or preceding node. You can also use the approach of relative XPath with text contains and relative XPath with multiple attributes. There is another important approach, parameterization of web test objects using Katalon Studio. This concept I've already published another course in Katalon Academy. Please refer that particular course. And the last approach to handle dynamic objects is creation and modification of test objects during runtime. And this is the topic that we are going to learn in this particular lesson. As part of section 2 in chapter 1, you learn what are the basic requirements to create and modify test objects in runtime by using Katalon Studio. Following are the basic requirements for creating and modifying test objects in runtime. So basically, you should be able to write your tests in script view of Katalon Studio. And you should have a basic knowledge of Java, and you should know the basics of Groovy, and also you should know the basics of selection methods supported by Katalon Studio for handling test objects. As part of section 3 in chapter 1, you learn what are all the different benefits of creating and modifying test objects during runtime by using Katalon Studio. Dynamic objects are a bit trickier to deal with than the static objects, but it is not so difficult as it may look. One way to handle is parameterization of test objects, but there are other possible approaches, which are define your test object directly in test case during runtime. And you can also create a separate keyword to create dynamic runtime objects. So this reduces the maintenance efforts as the element properties are dynamic in nature. So the main advantage of storing dynamic selectors in a separate keywords is that you keep all selectors in one place. So when a selector changes, you change only one place instead of all tests where you use them. This is our chapter 2, create test objects during runtime by using Katalon Studio. As part of section 1 in chapter 2, you learn how can we create test objects during runtime directly in test case by using Katalon. So following are the steps that we need to follow to create test objects during runtime directly in test case. First, we are going to identify the dynamic objects that you would like to handle by creating test objects in runtime. And then we are going to record and automate a test scenario using Katalon Studio. And our next step is to identify an element locator method to create test object during runtime. And then we are going to define above identified test object directly in test case to create runtime object. And then we are going to run automated test scenario and verify that the Katalon uses the newly created test object during runtime. So now let us see a real-time example by using Katalon Studio. How can we create test object during runtime directly in test case? So this is my Katalon Studio. Let us first see what is our first step. Our first step is identify the dynamic objects that you would like to handle. So in this class, I'm going to use an application called Cura Healthcare application, a sample application provided by Katalon. So let's go to Chrome and let me open the Cura Healthcare system. Okay, so now I want to identify a dynamic object. For that, click on Make Appointment and then enter your username and the password. Click on Login. If you see here, to select an healthcare program, you have three different options: Medicare, Medicaid, and none. So this selection of this radio button is a dynamic in nature. That means I don't want to define which radio button to be selected while automating my test cases, right? Instead, I want to declare this during runtime. So now I have identified a dynamic object that I would like to handle by creating test object in runtime. What is our next step? Our next step is now we need to record and automate a test scenario using Katalon Studio. So to save some time, let us go to Katalon Studio and then record a simple scenario. For that, I would like to create a new test case under folder called Katalon Academy Courses. Right click, click on New and click on Test Case. Name this as Create Runtime Object. Now, I'm going to use a record function to save some time. Here, click on Record Web, and this is the web application. Just now I showed you, Cura Healthcare, right? And then let's click on Record. As soon as you click on Record, it opens your Chrome browser. Now, Katalon starts recording each and every event that I'm going to perform. As soon as you click on Make Appointment, say it is recording your script. Now, provide your username and then password. And then click on Login. So now, let us select one radio button for now. And then stop recording. So now you need to save the script by clicking on Save Script. So it prompts you to store all your objects in the object repository. I'm going to create new folder. I'm going to name this as Create Runtime Object. And then click on OK. So now it saves your entire script, and also it saves all of your objects in the object repository. So if you see the script, this is my script, and let us run this script and see if it works. Click on Run. So now it opens your Chrome and then it performs login, and then it selects the radio button. Done. So our script working fine. So what is our next step? Our next step is identify an element locator method to create test object during runtime. Let us go to your Cura Healthcare system, right? And if you see here, this is my object repository. If you see the radio button that I have selected, so this is using your XPath. So now to create this radio button in runtime, I would like to use a selector method called XPath. So I've decided to use locator method called XPath, right? And now define above identified test object directly in test case to create during runtime. So now let us go back to your Katalon Studio. Now we need to go to script view. Okay, let's close this. So this is my script and this is your manual mode. I want to go to script mode by clicking on script. So if you see here, instead of selecting a radio button here in the script, right, I would like to create my own test object during runtime. So if you see here, what does this line is doing? This line is basically selecting a radio button called Medicaid program from the object that is stored under object repository. But I don't want to use an object from the object repository. Instead, I want to create my own object. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to comment out this. Okay. Now let us create a test object in runtime. As I told you, I have already identified XPath as my locator method. So if you see here, there are 3 radio buttons, and 3 radio buttons XPaths are defined like this. So if you see here, this radio button XPath is dynamic from this portion, and from here to here, this is all totally static. If you observe, this is changing program underscore Medicare, program underscore Medicaid, program underscore none. That means this is dynamic portion. Now let me create a test object in runtime. How can we do that? First, let us first define a variable to store XPath. What I'm going to do, def. What does it do? It is a keyword that is used to define a variable or function, and you can assign any object to this variable. So now I'm going to create a variable called XPath equal to, I'm going to copy this first XPath. XPath for the first radio button, right? Let's copy this and paste here. Let's use the double quotes. Okay, here I'm going to use the double quotes. So what I did here, I'm defining a variable and I'm storing XPath into that particular variable. I'm going to create an object now. Create a new object by using the class called test object. Test object. So I'm basically initiating a class called test object, and then you need to just simply click on control space. Import function that has been populated for this test object. Okay, test object. I'm going to name the variable as radio equal to, now I'm going to use a method called new test object, and then your object name. So what it is doing, basically I have created a new test object by using the class called test object and the method called test object. So if you see here, if I click on control and then if I go to this class, test object class, see, this is your class and this class has multiple methods. See, if you see, it has a method called test object, it has a method called set properties, it has a method called add property, right? It has multiple methods. So basically I'm initiating that class, and then within that class I'm initiating a method called test object. If you click on this test object, right, it will take you to the particular method, right? Done. So now we have just created a new test object, radio, right? Now I want to add a property to this particular test object. How? Again, call that variable called radio. Now as soon as you click on dot, right, it shows you all the methods that are applicable. Add property. See, within this I would like to use this one, which is, it uses 3 arguments. You need to pass the name of the property, and then what is the condition type, and then you need to pass your value of that particular property. I'm going to use this. Double click in this. So here, what is the name of the property? I'm using the name called XPath. This is my name of the property. And then what is the condition? So here, instead of condition, I would like to use an argument called condition type. See, you need to import this one. I want to import this condition type from katalon.code.test object. Now dot equal to, if you see here, as soon as I type, see, this is equal. I can use the equals, and then what is the value? The value I would like to pass here. I'm already storing XPath value under variable called XPath. So here I'm going to call the variable simply, right? And now I need to click on this radio button, correct? So I have created an object, and then I have added a property called XPath, and now I'm going to click this particular radio button. How? web UI dot click, right? And then define your object. What is your object? Your object is radio, the object that we just now created. This is the object, correct? So that means now here what I'm doing, this particular line of code is clicking on the object by using the object that is stored in your object repository. But whereas here I'm creating my own object called radio button, right? And then I'm performing click operation. So now this, whatever the object I created here, right? This won't impact the object that is stored in your object repository. So now let me save this script. I would like to run this particular script in debug mode. Let me right click and then put a breakpoint here. Okay. So let's go to debug and then click on Chrome. So now the script will be running in the debug mode, and then here once it reaches the breakpoint, it stops here. Yes, it open your Chrome. Now it logs in, and here see it reaches the breakpoint and it is asking me to switch to the debug mode. Just observe closely here. Okay, so if you see here, as soon as I step over this particular code, right? Let me step over this code. If you see, an XPath variable has been created, right? And now I am creating a new test object. Let's step over this on this particular line of code. So if you see here, now a new object called radio has been created. And if you scroll down here, this new object does not have any property. It is empty. So now here I'm adding a property. Let's step over on this particular line of code. Now if you see here, now a new property has been added here. See, what is the property? The property name is XPath and the value is this one, and this is active. This property is active now. Now as soon as I run this, right, resume, it clicks on radio button and then closes the browser. Now instead of Medicare, right, I want to select another radio button. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to simply put none. That means it's going to select third radio button. Again, let's run this in debug mode. Let's run this. It opened your Chrome browser. It's going to perform login and it breaks at the breakpoint. So if you see here clearly, right, again this time, now I've changed the property. Run this. It actually created a variable and then it created an object, right? But it does not have a property here. Property is empty. Now as soon as I run this, now a property, new property will be assigned. What is the property? Now my property value is new value. What is the value? The value is radio program none. That means it's going to select third radio button if Katalon uses the newly created test object instead of the object that is stored under object repository. So let's just step over this. So before you step over, let's put this browser here. We'll see which radio button will be selected. Step over. See, it selected my third radio button. That means the Katalon Studio is now using the object that we created during runtime within the test case. And simply resume this. Done. So this is how you can create your own test objects during runtime within the test case. As part of section 2 in chapter 2, you learn how can we create a keyword for dynamic runtime objects. The steps that we need to follow to create a keyword for dynamic runtime test objects. First step, you need to identify the dynamic objects that you would like to handle by creating test object in runtime. And then we are going to record and automate the test scenario using Katalon Studio. Then identify an element locator method to create test object during runtime. Create a separate keyword for above identified dynamic object and use the keyword in your test script during runtime. And the advantage of storing dynamic selectors in separate keywords is that you keep all selectors in one place. When a selector changes, you change only one place instead of all tests wherever you use it. And then we are going to update above recorded and automated test scenario by calling the above created keyword. And then we are going to run automated test scenario and verify that the Katalon uses the newly created keyword test object during runtime. So now let us see one real-time example. How can we create a keyword for dynamic runtime object by using Katalon Studio? So this is my Katalon Studio. So now let us see what is our first step. Our first step is you need to identify the dynamic objects that you would like to handle by creating test object in runtime. So as usual, we are going to use Cura Healthcare application provided by Katalon in this section as well. So if you go to Cura Healthcare application, as same as in section 1, I'm going to identify the same object, which is healthcare program radio button. And this is my dynamic object that I have identified, which I would like to handle in runtime. What is our next step? Our next step is record and automate the test scenario using Katalon Studio. So let's go to Katalon. So during our section 1 in chapter 2, we have basically recorded and created this script, correct? So now I would like to use the same script. Instead of recording it one more time, I would like to copy the same script and I would like to create a new test case. What I'm going to do, right click on this test case, copy this, and then paste this test case in the same folder, academic courses. And here I'm going to rename this test case as create runtime object 2, or let's say object underscore keyword. Click on OK. So if you observe closely this script, so what we are doing, we are basically opening a browser and navigating to Cura Healthcare application, and then we are clicking on make appointment, and then you are entering your username and you are entering your password, and you are clicking on login button. And then here, if you see in section 1, we have created a new object directly in test case during runtime. And this test object does not store under object repository, and this does not impact your object repository. This will be created during runtime and then executed during runtime. That's it. It vanishes. So it does not store in your object repository. Now, instead of defining all the steps to create test object directly in test case, I want to create a new keyword so that the maintenance will be very easy for me. I need not to modify creation of object in each and every test cases. Let's say I have 100 test cases. I don't want to create dynamic test object in multiple test cases. So that way the maintenance will be very, very difficult. So instead, I want to create a common keyword to create a runtime object and to add the property during runtime. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to comment out all these steps, right? And now to create a keyword, first you need to go to your keywords. So if you go to your left panel, there is a folder called keywords, right? So let me first create a package. To create a keyword, you need to first create a package, and I'm going to name this as com.utilities. Okay, and click on OK. And then under this package, I would like to create a new keyword. Right click, new keyword. Here, I would like to name this keyword as runtime test object. I'm going to make it as runtime test object. So basically, we are going to create a class name called runtime test object. And I'm going to define creation of test object in this particular runtime test object keyword. So here, let us first define a keyword, right? So to define any keyword, you need to use @keyword, right? @keyword. And then this identifies this method as a keyword. I'm going to define function called test runtime object. And then here, string, I'm going to define a string called xpath. I need to create a test object. So basically it's a function. I'm creating a keyword function called test runtime object. And here, so instead of test runtime object, let me name this as create runtime object. And now we are going to initiate a class called test object. And then here, and I'm going to define a variable radio. And here, I'm going to initiate a method called test object. And your object name. Okay, so if you see, as I already told you about these classes in my section 1. If you see, this test object is a class which has a multiple methods. There is a method called test object. That is what I'm using here, right? This stores your newly created test object into a variable called radio. Now, once you create a new test object, you need to add a property. Here, I'm going to call the same variable here, radio dot add property. Radio dot add property. Here, I'm going to use the second one. It has 3 arguments: argument name, condition type, and value. That means property name and your condition and your property value. Here, what is the name of the property? My name of the property is xpath. So here I'm going to define this as xpath. And here, instead of condition, I'm going to use condition type. Condition type, and import this condition type from test object. Dot equals, right? What is the value? My value is xpath. So I am gonna call this particular variable here because I'm defining a keyword function and I'm passing the variable xpath and the same variable I'm assigning here. Now this variable you can pass from anywhere. So whenever you call this keyword, you can pass your xpath value, and that will create your entire test object during runtime. Now save this. Now let us go back to our test script, and I commented out all your previous lines of codes. So here what I'm going to do, Here, I'm going to simply call the keyword that we created earlier. I'm going to simply call the keyword that we created earlier, this keyword, right? Here, instead of using object from object repository, what I'm doing here, I'm going to call the keyword, whatever I created just now. Here, how can we call the keyword? I can call the keyword custom keywords dot com dot utilities. So if you see here I just created a keyword called create runtime object, right, under package called com dot utilities, right? Select this. Now see, if you see here, the keyword has an argument. I need to pass an argument called xpath, right? So that we already defined here, right? So that means here, now let me do one thing. I want to add a click function also here. Let's stay here. Let me add a click function here. I created a object and now I want to click on newly created object. Click function. Now what is the object? The new object just now we created, right? Save this now. So now I'm calling this keyword here, right? So now if I run this in a debug mode, okay, let me do one thing. I have a breakpoint here. Go to debug, click on run. So this opens your Chrome and it's going to perform login. So once you log in, it reaches breakpoint. Now I'm going to switch into debug mode. So if you see here, so just step over. First, it creates a variable called xpath, right? It should call the newly created keyword. So now step over, okay? As soon as click on you step over, it should create a test object, newly created test object, and it should click on the object. See now, it's already clicked on none, right? And then I'm going to resume this. It's going to close. So if you see here, if you see your console, see here, it is actually using utilities.runtime test object, right? So this particular keyword has been used and a new object has been created by using the keyword and it clicked on the newly created object. So this is how you can create a keyword for dynamic runtime objects. In chapter 3, you learn how can we modify test objects during runtime by using Katalon. As part of section 1 in chapter 3, you learn how can we modify test object by changing the element property during runtime by using Katalon Studio. So following are the test steps that we need to follow to modify your test object by changing the element property. First, we are going to identify the dynamic object that you like to handle by modifying the test object in runtime. And then we need to record and automate the test scenario using Katalon Studio. And we need to identify an element locator method to modify test object during runtime. So in this scenario, we are going to identify ID as an element locator. And then modify the test object by changing the element property locator ID in runtime. So this will not impact the locator stored in object repository. And then we are going to run automated test scenario and verify that the Katalon uses the modified test object during runtime. So now, without delay, let us jump onto the Katalon Studio and let me show you a real-time example. How can we modify test object by changing the element property during runtime? So this is my Katalon Studio. So let us see first what are the steps that we need to follow. First, we need to identify the dynamic objects that you would like to handle by modifying the test object. Okay. So for that, let's go to Cura Healthcare System. Okay. So this is my Cura Healthcare application. So I am going to identify this username and password as my dynamic objects. How I'm going to tell you. Okay. I'm identifying username and password as my dynamic objects. Okay. And then record and automate test scenario using Katalon Studio. So instead of record and automate, what I'm going to do, I'm going to script manually. Here, I'm going to create a new test case called modify test object 1. And this is my new test case. So as I told you, I have identified dynamic object and I need to identify element locator method to modify the test object. If you see Katalon here, I've already stored 3 objects in my repository. What are those? One is this make appointment button and then your username, right? If you see make appointment button, username and your login button also. So if you open this username, this is the object that I stored in object repository. And this is using the element locator called ID. Now I'm going to use the same selection method ID as my element locator. Now let's go back to my test case. And here, first, I want to open a browser, correct? So for that, let's add a new keyword, open browser. And then I will have to navigate to the URL. Just simply navigate to URL. And what is the URL? My URL is, let's go to Chrome. And this is my URL. Copy this and paste it here. And then I need to click on make appointment button. Make appointment button. Here you simply call a keyword called click, where see we already stored object here, make appointment object under object repository. Simply drag and drop here. So once you click here, now I want to wait for an object which is username. I want to wait for an element username. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to use a keyword called wait for element visible. Web UI keyword, wait for element visible. This one. So here I'm waiting for username to be visible, right? And let's specify the timeout as probably 5. Okay. And here, once it is done, now I want to modify the property of this username in runtime. So what is the property in object repository? The property in object repository is ID and the value of ID is text username. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to modify the property of this object. But even though I modify the property, I'm modifying the property in runtime. So that is not going to impact my actual locator stored under object repository. I'll tell you what it is, okay? So now I'm going to call a keyword called, a new keyword called modify object property. What object I want to use? I want to modify the object property of username, right? And now here, if you see, you need to provide what is the property name that you would like to use. I would like to use the property name ID, right? And what is the matching condition? My matching condition is equals. And what is the modified value? So my modified value is txt-password. And I want to make this as active during runtime. So click on OK. Now if you observe closely, the same object stored in my object repository, which has the value of text hyphen username. But now I'm modifying the same object value as text. Let me just copy this one. I'm modifying the same object with a new value called text hyphen password during runtime. Now I want to store this particular whatever the modified object is there, right? I want to store this into a new object. How? Let's go to variable, and here let me define a new variable called new object, new underscore object. And here, what is the type? This is not variable. This is a test object. So basically, I'm not creating a variable. Instead, I'm creating a variable type test object. Right? Save this now. Now, I want to copy this variable. Let's go back to again manual mode. And here, the modified property, I would like to store this as an output new object. That means whatever the property that you modified, that will be storing under a new object variable. This variable type is, go to variable tab, test object. So now let me show you how does this work. Okay, now I want to send a keys. I want to send a keys now. Okay, first I'm going to send a keys for the object that I stored under object repository. Let's go to add new keyword, send keys. Here I'm going to use the object from my object repository. Drag and drop here. So this object repository has txt-username as its value, right? So now I'm going to send this as before modification. I'm going to send a key before modification. Now again what I'm going to do, I'm going to send keys one more time, send keys, but this time I'm not going to use the object from object repository. Instead, I'm going to use this new object that I have created, where I've modified the property to txt-password. Right? So that means here, instead of object, I would like to select test objects. Instead of test objects, just select other. And here, what is the variable that we created? New object. And click OK. Now, what is the keys that you would like to send the value? I'm going to say it as after modification. Click OK. So now, let's go to script view. I'm going to introduce a breakpoint here. Okay, I'm going to run this in, let's save this, debug mode. Right click and then run this. So this opened your Chrome, and here click on your make appointment. Now it reaches breakpoint. You need to observe closely here. If you see here, I modified the property of an existing object, right? And here, now if you see, my first send keys is happening by using the object that is stored under a repository, which is txt-username. That means it should now send the keys to username field. Now let me step over on this. It should send the keys before modification to username field. See, if you see here, before modification. Now I am sending keys to the new object that I created during runtime. And this new object is not going to impact your repository. And this new object has a value of id txt-password. That means which is your password. Now after modification, keys should be sent to password. Just step over on this. See, after modification has been sent to password field, which means we are modifying the object property which is already available in your object repository during runtime, and whatever the modified object that we have, I'm storing into a new object and I'm using that new object during runtime. But the modified property is not impacting the object that is stored in your object repository. If you go here now, still you will have a txt-username. It's not txt-password. So this is how you can modify your test object by changing the element property during runtime. As part of section 2 in chapter 3, you learn how can we modify test objects by adding a new element property during runtime. So in my previous section, we modified the test object by changing the element property. But in this section, we are going to modify the test object by adding a new element property. So following are the test steps that we need to follow. First, we are going to identify the dynamic objects that you would like to handle by modifying the test object in runtime. And then we're going to record a small test scenario by using Katalon Studio. And we are going to identify an element locator method to modify the test object during runtime. So I'm going to identify element locator as XPath in this scenario. And then we are going to modify the test object by adding a new element locator XPath to an existing object that is stored in object repository, which uses the locator as ID. And we are going to run automated test scenario and verify that the Katalon uses the modified test object during runtime. Now I'm going to show you a real-time example. How can we modify test object by adding a new element property during runtime by using Katalon Studio. So this is my Katalon Studio. Okay, let us first see what are the steps that we need to follow. My first step is identify dynamic objects that you would like to handle. So I'm going to identify username as my dynamic object, so that I want to add a new property to this particular object during runtime. So now let's go here. So now let us first record and automate test scenario. Instead of record and automate, I'm going to script manually. Okay, so I'm going to automate the test case manually. First, let us create a new test case called modify test object 2. What I'm going to do here, I already stored objects under object repository modify test object. Here, first let's add a keyword called open browser, and then add another keyword called navigate to URL. What is the URL? My URL is Cura Healthcare. So this is my URL. Copy this and then paste it here. So this is my URL. And then once I navigate to the URL, I need to click on make an appointment. Correct? So here, simply click. What is the button name? Make appointment. Drag this and drop it here. And then you are going to set a text for username. Simply add another keyword, set a text or send keys. Send keys to your username. And here, username is John Doe. I want to send a keys here again. Send keys. And here, I'm going to use this password. And I'm going to send the keys this is my password. And I need to click on login. Click on login button. This is my login button. So now let us quickly run this and see if it works. So it opened your browser and it's gonna perform login. It's successful. So now let's close the browser also. Okay, let's close the browser. Add another keyword, close browser. So this is running successfully. Now, if you observe closely, the object called username is using an XPath called this one, right? Now, I want to add, what is the property I would like to add? I would like to add the property again, XPath only. So you can basically use anything. So if you want to add a new property ID, that is also fine. You can use the new property called username, or you can add another new property called XPath. So if you see in the object repository, you have only one selector locator, which is this XPath. But during runtime, I would like to add another property also. That means I would like to identify this username field by using two properties. One is XPath div /div /input, and another one is the object property that is stored in object repository, right? So now what I'm going to do, go back here, and now let's go to your scripting. Go to script mode. Here, instead of directly entering the values to the username, I'm going to comment out this. I would like to wait for this username element to be visible. Okay, for that I'm going to say web UI dot, we have wait for element visible, right? Wait for an element visible. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use this one. You need to provide your test object and your timeout. So here, what is the object? The object is the same object that is stored under repository, which is username. I'm going to copy this simply. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste here. This one. Okay. And then timeout, I'm going to specify as, let's say, 5. Done. So I'm waiting for username field to appear on the screen. And then here, now I would like to get an existing property from the object repository. Get existing test object from repository, from object repository. So I'm going to get the existing test object, which is username, which is stored under object repository. What I'm going to do here, again, I'm going to use test object class, new object. I'm storing into a variable, and here I'm going to call a method called find test object. Find test object. Find test object. What object I'm finding? I'm finding an existing object, which is this one. Copy, paste it here. I'm actually creating a new object and then storing an existing object to this new object so that I can modify by adding a new property. So I'm going to add a new property to this new object, new underscore object. Here I'm going to add property here, add this one, where you are going to send 4 arguments: name of the property, condition type, what is the value of the property, is it active, true or false. Here name of the property is xpath, and the condition here I'm going to use condition type, and import this from your Katalon, Katalon core test object. What is your condition type? My condition type is equal to. So this one. Now, what is the value? The value I would like to add is the new value, this one. So here, this is my new value. And here, is it active? Yes, I would like to make it as active. If I make it as true, then this new property will be active. If I make it as false, this particular property will be inactive. So I'm going to make this as true. So now we have a new object, which is modified object from your object repository. And whatever I'm making the modifications to this object, right? Those modifications will not impact your repository. Remember that. Now, what I'm going to do here, now I am going to send keys to this username. I'm going to send twice. First is I'm going to use the same thing, right? This one we used earlier. So let's copy this and paste it here. I'm sending enter text in username field by using object stored under repository, right? This one, what I'm doing, I'm sending a keys called John Doe by using the object store in your object repository. Now again I'm going to send. This time what I'm going to do, I'm going to send keys by using the new object that I created now. I'm going to say enter text in username field by using new object that we modified. So I'm going to say web UI dot send keys. Send keys, this one. Here, what is your object? My object is new object. Copy this. And here I'm going to send keys as new object. And here I'm not going to send it as this one. I'm going to say it as, I'm going to send the keys as old object. Okay. So now save this and see here. Now we are going to run this in debug mode. Okay. We are going to run this in debug mode. What I'll do, I'm going to introduce a breakpoint. So now let me run in debug mode. Let's run this in debug mode. So it is actually stopped at the bullet point that we introduced the breakpoint, right? So it opened your username. Now, if you see here, test object, I'm actually creating a new object by storing an existing object, right? Let's step over. If you see, it creates a new test object here. So if you see here, it should create a new test object. See here, it created a new test object which has a properties. Let's go here now. Okay. If you see this clearly, here it created a new property here. XPath is your property which is coming from your object repository, right? It identified, it created a new object which has active property called input id txt username, which is coming from your object repository, correct? Now I'm gonna add a new property. If you observe closely here, these are all the properties 0 to 7. You see here, all are false. Nothing is here which is not active. You have a lot of properties, but all are is active false, correct? Is active false, right? You can see all false. Now when I run this particular code here, this one, we are adding a new property to this new object. Whenever I do this step over, it is gonna create an additional property number 8. Let's step over this, and that's gonna be active. See here, now the property 8 is appeared and it should be active. What is the property? XPath, and this is active true, correct? And what is the value? This is the value that we passed here in the script, right? Value that we passed, this one, right? Now that means now the new object that we created has a new property. Now when I run this, first it should enter old object, name called old object value, into the username by using the existing object in your object repository. Let's put it here. Now step over. It enters the keys called old object by using the object that is stored under object repository. See, it entered old object onto username. Now it is going to enter one more time. It's going to send the keys one more time with new object, but this time it will use the modified property. But this particular modified object is not stored under object repository, but this is a runtime object creation. So step over it. It should send a new object, but to the same field, but it uses the 2 XPaths. See, it sent new object. Now just simply resume everything and it closes. That's it. So that means we are modifying the object by adding a new property. This brings us to the end of lesson.